Hi everyone, welcome back to Wild Reads. My name is Dave. It's time for another wrap-up. This is my October wrap-up. Roll the titles. Hi everyone, welcome back. As I said in the introduction, this is my October wrap-up. Now, I read 7 books in October, so quite a lot of books to get through. Can't wait to tell you about them. And we're going to begin with the first book. I'm going to do this in the order which I read them in October. So the first book that I read was The Door by Magda. Now this is published by Vintage. I've got this slightly moody, gothic-y cover, but it has recently been republished with a new cover which looks very much like this. So translated from the original Hungarian, this came out in 1987. Now Magda was a very famous, she was one of the top fiction writers, or in fact writers, in her native Hungary. Unfortunately she died in 2007, I believe. But this is a fantastic book and a very, very famous book back in her home country. And I know a lot of people have read this over here as well. And I do really want to read, moving forward into the new year, I really want to read some more fiction in translation. So any recommendations, gratefully received. Thank you. And The Door was also made into a hit film starring Helen Mirren. Basically, the premise of this book is this centres around Magda and her relationship with a housekeeper that she takes on called Emerence. And Emerence is one of the most, she's a fascinating character because she's prickly and she sets her own wages for her employers. In the town where it's set, she sets her own terms and conditions, because she's so much in demand, the housekeeper, that she sets her own wages, she sets her own terms and conditions, and basically the story revolves around their relationship, and at times that relationship is very prickly, and it's a very unconventional relationship, but it's a relationship that they both come to rely on for very different reasons. Now, over the years, the two of them become increasingly close. Now, one of the key turning points of the novel is when Magda's husband becomes seriously ill, and she takes him overnight to have an operation in hospital, but she doesn't tell Emerence about this, and when she returns home, Emerence is furious with her for not informing her of what was happening in in Magda's personal life. The two of them stay up into the early hours and have this really deep and meaningful conversation which lays the foundation for their relationship that's to come. And it doesn't start off as a very especially close relationship, but it does develop. And it's a fascinating book. It's a really good book about human relationships and how they develop and how they don't always start off on the right path, but they eventually, it's fascinating to see how two people who are very, very different find common ground, and just it's basically a book about relationships. And I very much enjoyed my first sort of foray into translated fiction. Yeah, it was a very good book, and the characters in this book stay with you for a long time after you finish reading them. So, would I recommend The Door by Magda? Yes, I would. Now, the next book I read in October was Autumn by Ali Smith. And this was shortlisted this year for the Man Booker Prize. And I've never read an Ali Smith novel before. I've always been slightly, not scared off, but I've been cautious to take on an Ali Smith novel before, because I think she's got one of those reputations of being a bit inaccessible, and that's certainly what I've heard of some of her novels in the past. But I had heard that this one was one of her most accessible, so I was very keen to read it. I do love this cover. I love this sort of naked. I think Adam from Memento Mori in his brilliant Man Booker video this year called it a naked hardback, but I quite like it. Essentially, it's about two characters, Elizabeth and Daniel. Daniel is, I think he's 101 in the novel, and Elizabeth is about 31. But they were neighbours when Elizabeth was a young girl. And again, much like Magda Szabó's The Door, this book is about many things, but essentially it's about their relationship and the way they talk to each other and the way they share life stories. There's a lot of references to Brexit in here as well, and how Brexit and how these important votes fracture communities and fracture countries, and there becomes a divide. We've got the Brexit divide in this country. I think there's somewhat of a divide in America with Trump and things like that. But it's very much a book of its time. One thing I will say about Ali Smith is that some advice that someone gave me, that because she writes in a very different kind of way, and it's quite unlike anyone else's writing that I've ever come across before. But if you open your mind, she will let you in to her way of writing, and I found it a fascinating read, and I really enjoyed this book. So this will definitely not be my last Ali Smith. In fact, I think I'm going to read her entire back catalogue. So I must have been impressed. So it's an excellent book. So if you haven't read Ali Smith's Autumn, I do recommend that you pick it up. It's out now in paperback. Winter's out now as well. Now, the third book that I read in October was a disappointment. Now, I know that Sean, the book maniac, made a video recently on DNFing books and bailing on books. I think Sean bails on a lot of books. Traditionally, I've not been a bailer on books, even if I haven't enjoyed it or I'm not enjoying it. I do tend to sort of try and plod through it in the hope that it gets better. This one didn't. And this is Cousins by Sally Vickers. Now again, Sally Vickers has got a really big reputation as a brilliant writer, and I will say straight off the bat, it might have been me. It might have been that I think there is a case for sometimes you can just read a book, you can read the wrong book at the wrong time, and in other times that wrong book may be a right book for you. But I really didn't get on with this at all. It's about a family. It's got some lovely sort of end papers in here, but basically this is a family tree, and it's about the cousins in this family and the aunts and uncles in this family, and there's about 5 main characters in this book. But the thing that I didn't like about it is that I thought that the voices for those characters weren't distinctive enough, and each part of the book takes on a new character from that family, and you hear the story from their point of view. And it's about it's about cousins, as the title suggests. They weren't distinctive enough for me to make it all coherent. It was just very incoherent in that I couldn't distinguish who was what and who was where. It may have been me. I just didn't get on with this book at all. But I haven't given up on Sally Vickers, because I have bought another one of her books, so I will be giving her another try. You can't win them all, and it is quite unusual for me not to like a book this much. I am going to have a bit of a break. Got a new cup. Vicky bought me this. I might collect these because they're brilliant. I love these penguin mugs. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Can you say that? So the next book I read in October was That Summer at Hill Farm by Miranda. Now, I've been trying to read this book for a few months now, because I originally took this to Bulgaria with me. We went to Bulgaria back in June for a summer holiday, and I took a few books with me, but I didn't get hardly any reading done in Bulgaria whatsoever, so I was very disappointed in myself. I was just too busy people watching. That Summer at Hill Farm, this is again published by Vintage. I really enjoyed this book, and That Summer at Hill Farm contains some really interesting characters, and it really does paint a quite evocative picture of life in rural farmland England. So it's a really good book. It's about so there's Farmer Hayes, there's Mikey, his farmhand, the Smith sisters, a pair of warring sisters that haven't spoken to each other in nearly 40 years. Farmer Hayes' wife, Isabel, and her 3 children, and it's just about the exasperation of Isabel with her life, really. And it takes place over, of course, one summer, and it's really a story about hard, tough, rural English men, farm life, and tough English, uncompromising men. It is a beautiful rendering of the English countryside, and it's very evocative, and there's lots of great writing in here. And again, I hadn't come across Miranda before. I shall be keeping an eye on what she's published since. This isn't a new novel, this has been out for some time. This came out in 2011. So that summer at Hill Farm. So the next book I read in October was this one. This is The Vanishing of Audrey Wilde by Eve Chase, and this is published by Penguin Michael Joseph, and it's got a fantastic cover there, really evocative cover. And this is a book about a big country house, which I absolutely love, books about big country houses. And this is a split time narrative book, so on alternate chapters it jumps between the 1950s, where the story of Audrey Wilde takes place, and the present day. And it's set at a place called Applecut Manor, and a new family has moved into Applecut Manor, and they are Jessie and Will. Jessie and Will are on their second marriage. Will's wife was killed. Will's original wife was killed, and they've got so she's got a stepdaughter, and she's got a young baby daughter as well. And she's got this very fractured relationship with her stepdaughter. Her stepdaughter's sort of early teenage years, and is quite often the case. They enjoy a very hostile relationship with each other at first. But the story of Audrey Wilde is brought forward from the 1950s to the present day, and it's just a really good book. And the last chapter of this book is absolutely fantastic, where the two stories, the one from the 1950s and the one from the present day, come together in a way that's quite unexpected. It's a very good book. It's the first book that I've read from Eve Chase. The next book I read in October was My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Tallent. Now this is the UK cover. There's quite a lot of debate on BookTube that I've seen that the Americans have got, the American version has got a completely different type of cover for this, but I prefer this. I prefer the UK version. First time I heard about this book was a couple of months ago, and I really did want to get to it, and I bought this recently on the BookTuber meetup. This book is fantastic, but it should come with a big warning. This book is extremely violent, and it contains some of the most graphically violent scenes that I've ever read in a book. I know a lot of people have compared the violence in this book to that depicted in A Little Life. I don't see the comparison really, except in the severity of the violence. But there is a word of caution with this review, that if you are at all affected by extreme graphical scenes, violent scenes, then maybe you should approach this book with caution and maybe read some other reviews of it. It's brutal, absolutely brutal. There are scenes of sexual violence and incestuous violence. It's at times it's horrific. It is a very compelling and vivid story. So essentially it tells the story of this girl here. This is Turtle. Her real name's Julia Alverston, but she goes by the name of Turtle, or Kibble, as her father Martin calls her. Now her father Martin is one of the most hateful, misogynistic, horrible characters that you will ever get to read about in a book. He is absolutely vile in the way that he treats his daughter. Turtle, who's basically semi-feral. There's a lot of guns in this book, and she's very adept at. She's basically grown up in a world full of guns, and her father Martin is a survivalist, and we don't tend to find out why he's a survivalist, and again what drove him to that, or what led him to become a survivalist. But she's grown up in this environment. It's about her struggle and her struggle with life. It is compelling. It's a very compelling book. I was hoping to give it 5 stars. It didn't quite make it to 5 for me, so it rested at 4. It's an excellent book if you can get around, not necessarily force your way through the violent scenes. You know, if you're pre-warned about the level of violence in this book, then I think that most people will enjoy it. There is some beautiful writing in this book. The scenes, the nature writing, and the scenes where it's set in California. I would recommend it, but again with the note of caution that it is a very brutal read. The next book I read in October, or the last book I read in October, is one I took to Scotland with me. And again, I didn't read as much in Scotland as I thought I was going to, but Now, you may remember on the last wrap-up I did, I talked about this book. This is Into the Trees by Robert Williams, and he'd written, this was his third novel, and I really did enjoy this book. So Vicky ordered his first two books, which was How the Trouble Started and Luke and John. And this was Robert Williams' first book. This won the National Book Tokens Prize. And this is Luke and John, published by Faber. Robert Williams' style is, I'm very into his style. Now this is Luke and John, and it's about two boys. This must be Luke. So Luke and John is set in a northern town, and Luke and his father have moved to, they've relocated to a northern town after the death of Luke's mother. And just before he joins, so he has to go to a new school, and just before he joins the school, he befriends a boy called John. Now John dresses in a very unconventional 1950s style and lives in a very ramshackle house with a pair of aging grandparents. It's a brilliant book. Again, it's a book about relationships, and it's a book about friendship and the friendships that you strike up when you're at that impressionable sort of teenage part of your life. It's just, he's just got such a very readable style, Robert Williams. I'm not sure, and we were discussing this the other night, I'm not sure if Robert Williams is a YA writer or not. On the face of it, his books are very simple. They're very simple to read, but they're underneath, there's a complexity that isn't difficult to chip away at. So yes, I would recommend that one as well. That's Luke and John by Robert Williams, published by Faber. So that's it. That's the end of the wrap-up for this month. 7 books for me in October. On Wednesday, I think there's going to be a Scotland vlog coming out, if I manage to get it edited in time. So you may know we had our autumn break in Scotland last week, which was absolutely fantastic. Loved every second of it. First time we'd ever been to Scotland. It won't be the last time. I think we're going to return to Scotland time and time again. It was absolutely beautiful. So until the next time, whatever you're doing this week, enjoy your books, and I'll see you very soon for another BookTube video. Take care. Bye bye.